In the early decades of the 18th century, long after the first wave of settlers braved the wild Atlantic to carve out a home in the New World, the American colonies still teetered on the thin line between civilization and the raw wilderness. Forests stretched endlessly into shadow. Rivers flowed with secrets older than memory, and communities clung together not only for survival, but for the comfort of knowing they were not alone. But there was one settlement, small and young, that would find its name etched into the darker corners of American lore. Its fate would become a lingering question that history never fully answered, a story whispered along frontier trails and prayed about in church pews. It was known as Briar Hollow, a village that appeared on maps only briefly and disappeared from them swiftly, leaving nothing behind but questions. Briar Hollow was founded around 1719 in what would later become western Pennsylvania, tucked between towering pines and running streams, a place the earliest settlers described as peaceful, untouched, and strangely silent. The silence was the first thing newcomers noticed, for even in the thickest forests of the colonies, nature made itself known. Birds chattered, wolves called at dusk, rivers hummed under the wind. But in Briar Hollow, the air felt withheld, as though the land waited for something, as though it observed. The settlers who first arrived did not speak about these feelings openly, not at first. Instead, they praised the fertile soil, the clean water, and the abundance of deer and rabbits. The settlement grew modestly. 30 families, a wooden chapel, a trading post, several farm plots, and a meeting hall that doubled as a place for Sunday worship. The people of Briar Hollow were ordinary folk: farmers, blacksmiths, carpenters, widows, children, and elders from England, Scotland, and the German states. But they shared one thing: a determination to build a life away from the crowded eastern towns. For nearly 10 years, Briar Hollow prospered without incident. Then, in the fall of 1728, the disappearances began. At first, it was only one man, Jacob Merrick, a trapper who lived alone in a cabin north of the village. He was known to roam the woods for days, even weeks, so when he failed to return, no alarm was raised. But by the end of the month, his cabin was found intact, his tools in place, his firewood stacked neatly, and his evening stew burnt to the bottom of the pot, as though he had stepped outside and never returned. A search was conducted. They combed the nearby woods and riverbanks. They found nothing: no tracks, no blood, no signs of a struggle. It was as though the man had simply evaporated. The second disappearance was a 10-year-old girl named Anna Keller. Her mother said she had gone to fetch water from the creek behind their home. When she didn't come back after several minutes, her mother went to look. The girl's bucket lay on the ground, water spilled into the dirt. Again, no signs of the child. No footprints leading away. The search party grew larger that time. Nearly the entire town combed the woods, calling her name. But the forest remained silent. The pastor told the frightened parents that wolves, perhaps, had taken her. But no one truly believed that. Wolves do not remove their prey without leaving tracks, blood, drag marks, something. After Anna's disappearance, strange reports began circling among villagers. Some claimed to hear footsteps behind them while walking home at night, though no one was ever there. Others said they saw a figure in the trees, tall, narrow, unmoving. Yet when they looked again, it was gone. And there were the dreams. Many villagers claimed they had begun to experience the same nightmare, standing in a field of fog, unable to move, while something approached them slowly from the mist. They could not describe what it was, only that they woke before it reached them. Fear settled over Briar Hollow in ways the villagers could neither understand nor shake off. Families who once left their doors unlocked now bolted them at dusk. Men traveled in pairs when hunting, women prayed fervently, and children stayed indoors. But despite precautions, more people vanished. A family of 4 disappeared one night without struggle or sound. Their candles were still burning, their supper uneaten, their blankets rumpled as though they had only just risen from bed. In the morning, neighbors found the front door wide open, swinging gently in the breeze. A month later, the blacksmith's apprentice vanished while walking the short road between the smithy and his home, a road bordered by tall grass and a single dead oak tree. He was seen leaving work. He was never seen again. By the spring of 1729, Briar Hollow was no longer a thriving settlement. It was a place of whispered warnings and sleepless nights. 5 families abandoned their homes, fleeing eastward with only what they could carry. Those who remained argued constantly. Some believed the land was cursed. Others blamed attacks by unknown tribes, though no signs of conflict had been found. Some whispered of demons, spirits, or an ancient presence awakened by their settlement. But the truth, if it was ever known, was locked away in the minds of a few villagers. Among them, a man named Elias Rook. He was a quiet man, not known for storytelling or gossip. But after the disappearance of his wife, he began writing in a journal, one that would survive long after the village was gone. His writings would later be discovered in the ruins of Briar Hollow, stained by rain and mold, yet still legible. They would become the only first-hand account of the final months of the village. Elias wrote of sounds in the woods, low hums, like distant singing, moving through the air in the hours just before dawn. He wrote of shadows that passed too quickly between trees, shadows that did not match the forms of people. He wrote of hearing whispers on nights when the moon was thin and dying, whispers that came from the forest, though he could not discern the language. And he wrote of seeing figures standing between the pine trunks at the edge of his farm, tall, thin silhouettes that watched him as he plowed, unmoving even when he shouted at them. The villagers turned to their pastor, Reverend Ambrose Fitch, for guidance, but even he struggled with fear. In his sermons, he spoke of trials and temptations, of dark forces that test the faithful. But in his private journal, found years later, he confessed that he believed something unnatural had taken hold of the land. Something older than the settlement, older than the colonies, older perhaps than any human memory. By summer, people began to experience not just strange dreams, but waking visions. A woman claimed she saw her missing daughter smiling at her from the forest edge. When she ran toward the figure, it disappeared. Another man swore he heard someone calling his name from the riverbank, his brother's voice, though his brother had vanished 3 weeks earlier. Some villagers claimed to see lights in the woods at night, soft blue glows drifting between the trees, too steady and deliberate to be fireflies. Fear turned to panic. Panic turned to desperation. On the final recorded night of Briar Hollow, the remaining villagers gathered in the meeting hall. They argued, prayed, shouted, debated whether to flee or stay. Some insisted they pack their wagons at once and leave before dawn. Others claimed that movement in the dead of night was a death sentence, believing the thing, whatever it was, struck hardest in darkness. Elias Rook wrote that the meeting lasted until near midnight. It ended when a scream pierced the stillness. A man ran into the hall shouting that something had entered his home. Something had taken his wife. He spoke frantically, barely coherent, claiming a tall figure had stepped through his doorway without sound, without breath, and his wife had been drawn toward it, as though pulled by invisible hands. He tried to grab her, but she slipped through his fingers. "Like smoke," he said, and vanished before his eyes. Panic erupted in the hall. People ran outside, but the night was thick with fog, denser than any natural mist. The moon was gone, swallowed by the swirling white. Torches barely pierced the haze. Shapes moved through the fog, shadows, figures, illusions, no one could tell. But the villagers swore they heard footsteps all around them. Slow, soft, deliberate. Elias wrote that something was approaching the meeting hall. He described a presence, not seen, but felt. As though the air pressed inward, as though the earth itself held its breath. The villagers tried to barricade the doors. They prayed. They fought. But the fog seeped through the cracks like a living thing. And one by one, people began to vanish, right in front of those who stood beside them. No struggle, no sound, just gone. Elias's final entry, written in hurried strokes, read, "It stands at the doorway, taller than any man, and it knows my name." The journal ends there. When traders passed through the valley months later, they found Briar Hollow deserted, completely empty. Livestock wandered freely, doors hung open, food sat rotting on tables. Tools lay where they had last been used. No bodies were ever found, no signs of violence, no clues. The settlement that once held nearly 200 souls had vanished. News spread slowly across the colonies. Authorities investigated but found nothing. Some blamed illness. Others blamed native attacks, though local tribes denied involvement and showed no evidence of conflict. Many believed the settlers simply fled into the wilderness. But if they had fled, where were they? Why were their belongings left behind? Why were their wagons untouched, their valuables still in their homes? Over the next century, stories about Briar Hollow grew. Travelers claimed to hear humming in the valley at night. Others said they saw blue lights drifting in the trees. Some reported finding footprints that led nowhere, human-like but impossibly deep, as though the walker weighed far more than any person. And a few whispered that on certain nights, when the fog rolls low and the pines stand still, you can hear faint voices calling from the woods, voices asking for help, voices that sound like they belong to the long-lost settlers of Briar Hollow. But the most unsettling tale came from a surveyor in 1817 who camped near the ruins. He later reported that he woke to see a tall, thin figure standing at the edge of the firelight. It did not move. It did not speak. But when he looked into the woods behind it, he swore he saw dozens of dim figures standing silently among the trees. He fled that night and never returned. To this day, the disappearance of Briar Hollow remains one of early America's greatest unsolved mysteries. A settlement erased not by war, disease, or famine, but by something far stranger, something that left no traces, except for a single journal and a legend whispered across generations. And yet, the question remains, what truly happened in the autumn of 1729? Was it the land itself rejecting the settlers? Was it a force older than memory? Or was it something that still walks those woods, waiting for another village, another traveler, another soul? The forest remembers, and some believe the missing villagers still wander there, just beyond the veil of fog, waiting for the living to join them. And yet, despite the valley's warnings, humans have always been drawn to mysteries they do not understand. 50 years after Briar Hollow vanished, rumors of the empty settlement attracted the attention of natural philosophers, frontier explorers, and a handful of colonial authorities who believed the truth, whatever it was, should not be left to superstition. One such man was Dr. Nathaniel Hawthorne, no relation to the later author, an early American scholar who studied unexplained phenomena in the colonies. He traveled with 2 assistants and a hired guide to uncover what he called the Briar Hollow Enigma. His journal became another key document in the story, though most of his findings were controversial, dismissed, or intentionally hidden from public record. Hawthorne arrived in the valley in the summer of 1778. By then, nature had reclaimed the settlement. Only stone foundations remained where houses once stood. The meeting hall was a collapsed skeleton of charred beams, though no historical record mentioned a fire. Broken wells lay sunken into the earth. Trees grew through old hearths. But what unsettled Hawthorne most were the carvings. Deep in the bark of trees around the ruins, he found symbols, sharp, intersecting lines forming shapes unlike any European script, yet also unlike known native markings. The cuts were fresh, not weathered by time. When he asked local tribes about them, they warned him not to speak of the place again. One elder told him, "The forest walks here. It does not want you." That night, Hawthorne wrote that he heard footsteps outside his tent, but when he stepped out, nothing was there. The next morning, his guide refused to continue the expedition, insisting he had seen something tall moving behind the trees just before dawn. But Hawthorne pressed on. He found the remains of Elias Rook's home near the northern ridge. Inside, under a collapsed beam and layers of moss, Hawthorne discovered a wooden box containing loose papers, additional pages of Rook's writings that had never been catalogued. These lost entries painted an even grimmer picture of the final days. Rook described hearing voices outside his window at night, voices mimicking his wife's tone, calling his name softly. He wrote of seeing silhouettes of missing villagers standing motionless between the trees. They did not blink. They did not speak. But when he approached them, they dissolved into the fog like disturbed shadows. Rook believed the village had awakened something ancient, something that had been dormant in the valley long before settlers set foot there. His last decipherable line was, "We built on ground that remembered." Hawthorne also wrote about something strange with the soil. In several spots, the ground appeared unnaturally soft, sinking slightly underfoot, as though something beneath had hollowed it out. But when he dug, he found no tunnels, no burrows, just soil, as if it had been aerated by invisible movement. On the 4th night, Hawthorne's assistant, Turner Caldwell, disappeared. The expedition had camped near the old trading post. After dinner, Turner walked a few feet into the trees to relieve himself. He never returned. The remaining men spent hours searching with lanterns, shouting his name into the dark. The next morning, they found Turner's footprints leading away from the camp, then stopping abruptly in the middle of an open patch of earth, as if he had been lifted straight into the air. Hawthorne wanted to continue his search. His remaining assistant begged him to leave. The argument lasted hours, but when night fell again, the valley made its decision for them. A thick fog rolled in, unnaturally fast, unnaturally cold. Hawthorne described shadows forming in its depths, long limbs, tall silhouettes, watching. When one stepped closer to the firelight, Hawthorne dropped his lantern and fled. He and his assistant ran through the woods blindly, guided only by moonlight and adrenaline. They reached the main trail by dawn. Hawthorne never returned to the valley, but he later wrote a letter to a colleague. "What dwells in that place is not animal, not spirit, not human. It is something older, something aware." His report was quietly archived. Some believe it was suppressed. But the story did not end there. In 1799, A group of soldiers stationed in the area reported seeing blue lights drifting above the valley floor. They claimed the lights moved in patterns, almost like a slow, deliberate march. When the men approached, their horses panicked, refusing to go further. One soldier insisted he heard whispers in the fog, whispers that sounded like children. In 1824, a team of loggers attempted to clear timber from the valley. Their diaries recounted that trees sometimes shook without wind, and at night they heard what they described as singing, a low, resonant hum unlike any human voice. After 2 weeks, one logger vanished, and the remaining crew abandoned the site immediately, refusing to ever return. By the mid-1800s, Briar Hollow had become a story told around campfires, part cautionary tale, part ghost story. But those who lived near the valley swore that the land was not empty. Hunters reported seeing footprints that sank several inches deep, as though made by something incredibly heavy. Others described glimpsing tall figures that moved impossibly fast between trees, leaving no sound, no trace, no scent. In 1883, a survey team mapping the region discovered something unprecedented. A circle of trees over 200 feet wide, perfectly dead, gray, petrified, as though life had been drained from them in an instant. At the center stood a single stone column covered in the same symbols Hawthorne had found carved into trees a century earlier. No one could determine who built the column or how it ended up there. Then came the most unsettling discovery. A prospector in 1904, searching for mineral deposits, found a narrow fissure on the north slope. Inside, he claimed to see a ledge filled with human remains. But these remains were not normal. Some were twisted, bones unnaturally long, skulls warped slightly, as if reshaped or stretched. The prospector fled the region, telling no one officially, but recounting the story on his deathbed years later. Whether his claim was true or a fevered hallucination, the valley's reputation only grew darker. By the early 20th century, Briar Hollow had been declared a no-go zone by local communities. Hunters skirted its borders. Travelers stayed clear. Even birds seemed to avoid flying over it. Yet, some were drawn to it. Curiosity. Obsession. A desire to uncover what truly happened. In 1932, 2 amateur investigators entered the valley with recording equipment and rifles. They never returned. Their abandoned campsite was found weeks later. Bedrolls neatly arranged, rifles leaning against stumps, untouched. Footprints circled the site in widening arcs, as though the men walked slowly outward until simply stopping. During World War II, military scouts conducting exercises in the region reported seeing unexplained lights and vapor formations that moved against the wind. Their commanding officer dismissed the claims, but after the war, one scout wrote privately, "I saw a tall figure in the fog. It looked like a man, but stretched. When I shined my light, it vanished like smoke." Today, Briar Hollow remains one of America's oldest unresolved mysteries. The valley is still largely untouched, avoided by locals who insist that something in those woods does not want company. Scientists who have reviewed historical accounts offer theories. Mass hysteria, exposure to toxic plants or gases, a sudden outbreak of illness, a coordinated mass exodus, even an early case of group psychological breakdown. But none of these theories explain the identical nature of the disappearances, the lack of remains, the consistent reports from 1729 to modern times of figures in the fog, of humming in the night, of blue lights, of shadows too tall to be human. Some say the valley is a thin place, where the boundary between worlds is fragile. Others claim it is a place where something ancient sleeps, something awakened long ago by settlers who unknowingly built their homes atop its resting ground. And every so often, hikers who wander too close report hearing something strange, something that shouldn't be there. A child laughing, a woman calling for help, a deep, low hum that vibrates the ribs, or footsteps in the fog, just behind them. But when they turn, nothing is there. Nothing visible, at least.